Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Overeaters Anonymous Recovery from Relapse meeting. Today is 16th of December, 2025, and I'm absolutely delighted today to have Lawrie C. Lawrie has been a faithful servant of OA for many years, and I'm going to hand it over to him now for some experience, strength, and hope. Take it away, Lawrie.
Thanks, Rita. I'm Lawrie. I'm a compulsive overeater. I've been in the program since February 11th of 1986. I went through 7 years in and out of recovery, then relapse, then recovery, then relapse, until I was brought to my knees by the shyest person in the room, who confronted me in the most loving way and suggested that I really had to start working the steps. It's a couple of days past the year since I spoke last to this meeting. So I don't want to repeat my lengthy story, which I think is what I basically talked about the last time I was here. But briefly, I was encouraged to join OA by a person whose life had been so much more difficult than mine. And had become an alcoholic and had been literally snatched out of the gutter on the main street in my hometown here by some AA people, and had gone on to do incredible things, and had a serenity about him that really appealed to me, even though I'm not and never have been addicted to alcohol. But he told me that even though I have led a really privileged life, certainly compared to his, and in my experience in OA, compared to a lot of the experiences of many of my friends in OA, whose accomplishments in OA and whose recovery simply astound me. But I had the right to consider my addiction to compulsive eating as seriously as he considered his addiction to alcohol. And that is one of the most difficult things we have to overcome in OA. Is that unless we weigh 500 pounds or we weigh 40 or 50 pounds, one more day of compulsive eating or restricting is not going to kill us. There's not going to be a dramatic moment where we run the risk of dying right away, as is true for so many other 12-step fellowships, where you run tremendous risks, indulging in drugs, indulging in alcohol, gambling away your entire life, or gambling away your entire fortune. But for compulsive eaters, the addiction is a slow death by 1,000 cuts. And it's hard sometimes to treat it as seriously because of the lack of drama. And because of that, and it is also probably the last socially acceptable addiction. Smoking used to be acceptable. Drinking a lot used to be acceptable. Gambling, I guess now it's pretty acceptable still. Maybe that's the other one. But it still is, we don't have a smoking channel, and we don't have a drinking channel, but we certainly do have food channels. And we have to understand that even though our addiction is truly life or death, because whether we undereat or overeat, we are dooming ourselves to a life that gradually cuts itself off from our fellow human beings, cuts ourselves off from being able to be mobile. We run the risk of any number of diseases, ailments, pains, and debilitating strokes and things of that sort, that can truly make our lives miserable, a life and death, or death and life, I should say. And we don't think of ourselves as being as serious as the alcoholic or the drug addict or the gambler. And we have to, as a group of compulsive eaters, in carrying our message, we have to emphasize the deadly nature of our addiction and acknowledge that it may not look as dramatic, but that it is as deadly. And that's one of the biggest burdens that we have as in terms of carrying our message, is to tell our story in such a way that the person hearing it not only identifies with the addiction, but also accepts that it is a life or death addiction that deserves the same kind of dedication, the same kind of commitment to dealing with that addiction as all the other more dramatic addictions that have 12-step fellowships around them. And it took me 7 years, my 7 years of in and out relapse, to accept that, even though my friend had told me right at the beginning in 1986 that I had the right to treat it seriously, and that gave me the impetus to attend meetings and to work the steps. It became too comfortable. And I was sort of accepting the notion that I could go in and out of relapse. And I was hearing it in the rooms. I was hearing people say, that's okay. Relapse is part of recovery. Well, I guess if you learn from the mistakes you've made, that is what recovery is. You are learning from the mistakes you're making and changing the kind of person you are. I'll get into that later. But relapse is not part of recovery. You don't have to relapse. And the painful lessons that I went through from relapse are not ones I'd like to relive. So this whole sense of that's okay, just pick yourself off the floor, just try again, leads to a sense of harm reduction that, I can sort of go in and out of recovery. And I see it. We have a friend who is a drug addict who continues to believe that it's possible to live a normal life while going through incredibly dangerous binges. In my part of Canada right now, it's in the zeros and minus zeros Celsius. And when you're indulging in drugs and you're living a homeless life, you run the risk of dying very dramatically. He's already lost parts of his fingers from frostbite. And yet he still thinks that he can manage his addiction. Well, if he thinks he can manage his addiction, how much easier it is for me to think I can manage my addiction, because one donut isn't going to kill me. Obviously, it's not. One of anything that I have been addicted to is not going to kill me. But if I return, it will. That was my the first thing that I had to understand and remind myself. And carrying the message allows me to remind myself, because I can continue, as I continue to carry the message, I can remember what it was like to be down in my addiction, because I can tell my story about my addiction. That's one of the great benefits. Set aside the notion that you're doing your best to help another human being, that you're being outside of yourself and you're focusing on someone else and trying to help them, which is healthy and wonderful to do. You're also reliving the misery that you lived in when you were in your addiction. And that's very powerful. I don't think I could remember all the stories if I hadn't repeated them, my addiction stories, if I hadn't repeated them over and over again. The second thing I had to learn in my recovery from relapse was that my addiction is unique to me. It may overlap with many people in this fellowship, but somewhere in this room of what is 104 people right now, 103 excluding me, there are people who can eat anything I can't eat. And there are things I can eat that other people in this room can't. There are eating behaviors I can indulge in that other people in this room can't. And there are eating behaviors that other people can indulge in that I can't. And somewhere in this room, there may be someone whose plan of eating is entirely different from mine. And I had to learn, and it was the group conscience of OA in subsequent years that ultimately set this out very clearly, that what worked for some person might not work for me. And that one of the great dangers we have in OA is that there are all kinds of people who take for granted that their problem is the same as other people's problems. And that there are sponsors who say, you adopt my plan of eating and you'll be fine. And that is contrary to the group conscience of OA as expressed in our literature that's been approved, which says each person has to figure out their own plan of eating, what it is that they have to abstain from, and how they're going to abstain from those things. Because abstinence is defined as refraining from compulsive eating and eating behaviors and working towards and maintaining a healthy body weight. And the literature is clear that we have to figure it out ourselves. That what works for one person might not work for another. And that's another difficulty that OA has, because each one of us gets to pick our own plan of eating. And sometimes the problem is that we get our plan of eating as a diet. It's given to us, or we just adopt it. It may be nutritionally good, but it isn't necessarily what we have to abstain from. You know, I'm not celiac, so I can have gluten, but there may be very good reasons why someone chooses to be gluten-free, but certainly someone who is celiac has to go gluten-free, right? That's not part of their plan of eating unless they also are addicted to eating things that have gluten in them. If I were diabetic, I'm not, but I could be if I were as overweight as I was going to be. There were certain foods that I shouldn't eat because I'm diabetic, not because I necessarily wanted them. Things of that sort. You know, if I might like shrimp and might develop an anaphylactic shock, but that would not be part and not be able to eat shrimp. But if shrimp is not something that triggered me into compulsive eating, that's not part of my plan of eating. It's something I have to abstain from, completely separate from my plan of eating. So a plan of eating has to set out what it is that you have to abstain from and how you choose to abstain from those things. For instance, I first of all developed a list of foods for myself that had triggered me and that I had found myself over the years compulsively eating, not being able to stop at times. Temporarily while other people were watching, sure. But I just went back to them and I just put them into my mouth. I have eaten, entire gallons or 4 liters of ice cream at a time. I have eaten entire chickens, especially all the fatty parts, but I've decimated chickens, chewed all the marrow out of the bone. I've eaten so much buttered popcorn, because I just keep making it. I've eaten it all. Now, that is clearly, those are things. Am I freezing? I think I am. No? Those are things that I was clearly addicted to. As I made my list of things that I was addicted to, I came to the conclusion that for me, but not for anyone else, that there was a constant theme, that it was a very high fat content mixed with salt or mixed with sugar or sometimes mixed with salt and sugar that caused me to compulsively eat. But I began also to realize that for me, there were eating behaviors. And I began to understand that OA runs the spectrum between, on the one side, particular foods, specific foods, substances, just like Alcoholics Anonymous has one substance in many forms, but alcohol in any form. And on the other side of that, extreme side of that spectrum, are behaviors like Gamblers Anonymous or Debtors Anonymous, where they have particular behaviors they have to abstain from. And in between are fellowships, and there aren't many of them, that run the gamut between both behaviors and specific substances. And in the middle, not just substances, but ingredients and sometimes combinations of ingredients. And so it's also complicated for us in Overeaters Anonymous to figure out what it is that we have to abstain from, let alone how we're going to abstain from it. So I found, for instance, that my eating behavior, I had 2 eating behaviors that were major. One was I constantly wanted to keep my mouth busy, chewing and sucking and keeping my mouth busy was something that might have been ingrained in me when I was a baby. My mother always talked about how, when she was nursing me, the doctors at the time I was born said that I had to nurse every 4 hours and nothing in between that. So she said there were times when I would cry for 2 hours at a time until she was ready to nurse me, and how that bothered her, and that she had to wean me early because that's what the doctors told her. And so who knows whether that kind of need to keep my mouth busy came from that, or whether it's just something else that is ingrained in me. And I also had the eating behavior of having to keep full up to the top of my neck, figuratively. And I had to abstain from those. Now, both of those are part of a need to satisfy something in me that a behavior would satisfy. And my plan of eating had to find a way, even though I knew what foods I had to abstain from, the ingredients, the combinations of ingredients that I had to abstain from, I also had to figure out in what way was I going to abstain from those two major behaviors. The need to keep my mouth busy all the time, I settled on 3 meals a day, nothing in between. That was easy. That meant that there were only specific times during the day when I would eat, and they would be dedicated to eating nourishing foods that didn't contain my triggers. Fine. That was relatively easy. How was I going to deal with volume? Because even if I didn't eat the things that triggered me, I could eat other things that were healthy, that were good for me, but I could overeat them, and that would help me, and that would mean that I would gain weight. Now, I was able, unlike many of my friends in a way, I was able to sort of gauge when I was full down to my navel, in a sense, not anatomically true, but I could figure out when I was full enough rather than full. And that's enabled me for the last number of, 32 years to remain abstinent in a way that allowed me to reach a healthy body weight and maintain it. Many of my friends say they don't know where their navel is. They don't know when they're full, or if they're restrictors, they think they're full when they're not full enough and they don't eat enough. So they weigh and measure. And that's their solution to how they abstain from a particular eating behavior that we have in common, which is, the overeaters have the need to be full, to just stuff themselves. So a plan of eating has to be understood as the way in which we are going to abstain from those things that trigger us. The next thing I had to learn, and this was, and by the way, that was one of my main reasons for relapse for over the 7 years, because I thought that, like every diet told me, that I could lose the weight, work the steps, and that I would be able to refrain from compulsively eating, but I could eat anything in moderation. And so whenever I would lose the weight, work the steps, feel great, I would say, okay, now I can have a little bit of dessert, or I can have a little bit of this particularly fatty food that I was going to eat. And then within 5 or 6 months, I was back to just shoving it all into my mouth. So I had to accept the notion that there were things I had to abstain from, clearly that I had to abstain from. And that took me 7 years to accept that, because people were too willing in a way to tell me what I should abstain from. And and that was the real danger. It's unique, it's hard to figure out, and you have to keep being vigilant and acknowledging that even though this wasn't on your list, it's got to go back, it's got to go on your list. I then had to learn the clear truth that's found in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous very, very clearly. It's not found quite as clearly in our literature, but it is there. And that is that my real problem is not that there are certain behaviors and certain foods or ingredients that I have to abstain from that trigger me, but that my real problem is in my mind. And my mind finds reasons for returning to that which I know I should be abstaining from. My mind blanks out those reasons and comes up with reasons for returning that make sense at the time. And one of the problems we have in OA that we have to acknowledge is that sometimes we blame our emotions as the only reasons that we give for returning. Very often, those are the reasons. Very often, the traumatic lives of many of my friends in this program keep coming back to them, and they keep living with those traumas, and those traumas lead them to compulsively eating or compulsively restricting or compulsively vomiting or whatever. But the reality is that even if you have not lived a traumatic life, or even if you've dealt with the traumas and your life is now in good shape, if you have a real addiction to compulsive eating, your mind will find a reason to return to that which you should be abstaining from. And that reason can be simply silly, insane, stupid, but it will find a way that makes sense to you at that moment. And the whole chapter, more about alcoholism in the big book, is about the stupidity of that. You know, the example of the jaywalker, the example of the guy who had a great day in Washington. These are examples of people who it just, the thought occurs to them, well, why don't I? And it's like a nudge. It's just sort of like saying, well, okay, you can have some. It's free. They made it for you. You've been good for a year, 6 months, a month, a week, a day. Or it could be and this has happened to me, you didn't eat the bun, so you can have the cake. I mean, this is not trauma relived. It is just insane. And we have to understand that the problem is not the trauma or the emotion. The problem is that we have a mind that uses whatever reason makes sense at the time to return to that which we are trying to abstain from. And the reason I had to understand the distinction between I can't stop once I've started and I can't stop from starting, which is the vicious circle that we've all lived through, is that the 12 steps never solve the problem of I can't stop once I've started. That problem is innate in us. We will always, if we go back to what it is that we have to abstain from, once we go back to that, our bodies or our minds or whatever, I don't know what it is in me about the eating behaviors, but something is triggered and I need more and I need more, and my body will cry out if I try to withdraw from it. And when I say body, I mean my whole psychological body, everything that I can't control on my own, in the sense that I can't control my blinking. I can stop blinking for 30 seconds, but I can't stop blinking for a minute or 2 minutes. I can hold my breath for me at my age, maybe 30 seconds is good, but I think the world record is six minutes or something. But at some point, my body's going to say, you got to breathe. You've got to blink your eyes. So what the steps do is solve the mind problem. They give you the hope, and this is the hope of this fellowship. This is the hope of every 12-step fellowship, that we will not be tempted to return, that our minds will be clear, that we will maybe even offer the things that we have to abstain from, and our minds will say, this is poison for me. Other people can have it, I can't. And that sanity gives a level of serenity. And how is it accomplished? Oh, I'm going to summarize this whole thing in 5 minutes. It's accomplished by developing a harmony with your higher power, living in harmony with your higher power. Now, I don't have any deity whatsoever. I am a lifelong agnostical atheist, atheistical agnostic, third generation. But there are things I believe in that I cannot justify. Things, deep values within me. I call them love, truth, justice, and beauty. Other people may call them other things, joy, giving, whatever it is. But I can't justify my belief in those things, but they're what I want to govern my life with. Just as those who have deities want to live their lives according to their God. The problem is,
Lawrie.
thank you, Claire. The real problem is, as the big book uses these words, is that our addiction has blocked off our deepest beliefs from us. If you think of our addiction, our deepest beliefs as being in our hearts, and our thinking and acting as being in our heads, there's a pipeline, and our addiction has blocked off that pipeline. And what the steps do is get rid of the blockage so that what's in our heart flows through our head, and we are now living in harmony with our deepest beliefs. When we live in harmony with our deepest beliefs, rather than living contrary, because when you're living in an addiction, you're never living according to what you believe in. You're living contrary to what you believe in. You're living a self-destructive life. You're thinking of yourself and not of the deep values that either your particular deity espouses or embodies, or in terms of whatever deep values you may have. You're living compelled to live with your own needs, not your own wants, not your own deep values. When you live in harmony with what you believe in, you are then serene. And when you're serene, you're sane. And when you're sane, you don't want to return to that which you have to abstain from. And the steps do that as simply as identifying what the flaws in your character are that are blocking you, and giving you the way in which you can become a different person, living in harmony with what you deeply believe in, rather than with all your defects of character that block you. And that comes from steps 4 through 9. The guarantee of this program is by the time you finish step 9, you will, in fact, have that serenity if you've been abstaining from what you know you have to abstain from. You work the steps. In effect, step 8 and 9 are, I want to be the kind of person who lives according to what I deeply believe in. In the past, I have not done that. So far as possible, without harming anyone else, I am going to try and clean up the past so I can, and not worry about the future, so I can live in the present and do the best I can. And once you achieve that sense of serenity and purpose, where you're not trying to control the past that can't be controlled or control the future that can't be controlled, but live in the present. It's that sense of purpose that is also exemplified by having to give it away to others in order to keep it. Step 12, it's that sense of purpose that gives us the serenity and allows us to keep the serenity into our whole lives. So these, and that's the spiritual awakening. You can see it as both a very sudden, powerful spiritual awakening that some people have because of their particular kinds of beliefs and they feel the presence of their God. And you can see it as the slower kind of spiritual awakening where you gradually you understand and have confidence that and trust that you are living the best life you can according to what you deeply believe in. And that's all the steps do. And the last thing I want to say in the time I have remaining is that the steps can be done quickly. And that's important to know because many of the ways of doing the steps that we see within, I guess, every 12-step fellowship has you wait and wait and wait. You get abstinent and then you wait and then you're on this step and you have to be on this step for a long time. Then you're on that step. You have to be on that step for a long time and that step. But there are many ways of working the steps in which you can get to step 9, that guaranteed moment of recovery, quickly. And once you abstain, you're in a race with your mind. Is your crazy, insane, twisted mind going to get you back to that which you have to abstain from? Or are you going to reach step 9, where your mind will be clear because the obstacles, the blockage will be gone? And find a way of working the steps that is quick and simple. And my time is up enough that I want to thank you for the ability to carry the message to those who still suffer. And thank you very much for your indulgence.
Oh, Lawrie, thank you so much. What a message of depth and weight. I was just going to read out a little paragraph from the big book from We Agnostics. It says, "Let us make haste to reassure you. We have found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found God does not make too hard terms for those who seek him. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men."